The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon, but the house was already buzzing with the kind of chaotic energy that only comes with the holidays. Elena had been awake since 4 in the morning, her mind racing through a checklist that seemed to grow longer every time she crossed something off. This wasn't just a normal Thursday dinner, this was the Thanksgiving dinner. For the first time in 5 years, she was hosting the entire family, and the pressure was mounting with every hour that passed. She could hear the oven timer beeping in the distance, a relentless reminder that the bird was in her hands and there was no room for error. The house smelled incredible, a mixture of sage, roasting turkey, and the sweet scent of pumpkin pies cooling on the counter. But despite the delicious aromas filling the air, Elena felt like she was walking on a tightrope. Her mother-in-law, Mrs. Darcy, was known for her sharp tongue and high standards. If the turkey was dry, she would mention it for the next decade. If the cranberry sauce was too tart, it would become a family legend. Elena just wanted everything to be perfect. She wanted to survive the night without crying in the bathroom, which was her usual standard for a successful family gathering. Around 11 o'clock, heavy footsteps thudded down the stairs. It was her son, Kevin. Usually, Kevin was the definition of a holiday zombie. He would stumble out of his room around noon, eyes half closed, grab a cup of coffee, and disappear into his room or onto his phone until the food was ready. Elena loved him dearly, but he wasn't exactly the helpful type. He had just come back from a year-long trip traveling around Europe, and while he had come back with a new beard and a lot of stories, Elena didn't expect him to contribute much to the cooking process. To her surprise, Kevin walked into the kitchen looking wide awake and oddly energetic. He was dressed in a clean shirt, which was a shock in itself. He inhaled deeply, smelling the feast that was underway, and walked over to where Elena was frantically peeling potatoes. "Hey Mom, something smells amazing in here," he said, leaning against the counter. Elena didn't stop peeling. "Thanks, honey. It's going to be a long day. I'm just trying to make sure I don't burn the rolls or forget to salt the water." Kevin looked around the bustling kitchen. "Is there anything I can actually do? I feel useless just standing here." Elena paused for a second, waiting for the punchline. Kevin never volunteered to help. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked, putting a hand on his forehead. "Do you have a fever?" He laughed, swatting her hand away playfully. "I'm serious, Mom. I learned a few things while I was away. I actually cooked quite a bit over there. Let me handle the gravy." Elena narrowed her eyes. The gravy was risky. It was the soul of the meal, but it was also easy to mess up. If it was lumpy or salty, the dinner was ruined. "I don't know, Kevin, that's a big responsibility." "Trust me," he said, his eyes sparkling with a confidence she hadn't seen in him before. "I have a recipe. It's an old family recipe I picked up from a chef in a little village. It's a special roux. It's going to change the way you look at Thanksgiving. I promise." Desperation began to creep in. Elena still had to clean the guest bathroom, set the table, and prepare the appetizers. Having someone take charge of the gravy would free up her hands significantly. She looked at him, really looked at him, and decided to take the leap. Maybe traveling really had matured him. "Okay," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're on. But please, follow the recipe. And if it looks like it's burning, call me." "I got this, Mom." "Go chill out," Kevin said, shooing her out of the main cooking area. Elena hesitated for a moment, watching as Kevin began to pull ingredients from the pantry. He moved with a strange purpose, gathering flour, butter, and various herbs she didn't even know they had. He opened the fridge and pulled out a jar of something that looked like butter, but the label was peeled off. She wanted to ask what it was, but Mrs. Darcy had just arrived, and the doorbell was ringing like a fire alarm. For the next 2 hours, the kitchen became Kevin's domain. Every time Elena tried to sneak a peek, he was there, guarding the stove like a watchdog. "No peeking," he would shout. "It needs to reduce properly. If you let the steam out, you ruin the flavor." The smell, however, was intoxicating. It wasn't the usual salty, meaty smell of gravy. It had a deep, earthy aroma that made everyone's mouth water. When Uncle Jerry walked in, he actually stopped in the hallway and sniffed the air. "What is that smell, Elena? Are you making something new?" "It's Kevin," she called out from the dining room, where she was frantically polishing silverware. "He's making the gravy." Kevin. Uncle Jerry laughed. "Well, I'll be. Maybe the boy finally learned a skill." By 6 o'clock, the house was packed. The noise level was deafening, a mix of loud chatter, football on the TV, and clinking glasses. Elena was exhausted, but the table looked beautiful. The golden turkey sat in the center like a trophy, surrounded by bowls of mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and stuffing. "Everyone, dinner is ready," Elena announced, clapping her hands together. The family filed in, ohing and ahhing at the spread. Mrs. Darcy took her seat at the head of the table, eyeing the turkey critically. "It looks moist," she said, which was the highest compliment Elena could hope for. Just as everyone sat down, Kevin emerged from the kitchen. He was holding a large ceramic gravy boat, steaming hot. He had a huge grin on his face, looking like a proud artist presenting a masterpiece. He walked around the table, offering the gravy to everyone first before he sat down. "So," Kevin said, standing at the end of the table, "I know I usually just eat and run, but I wanted to contribute this year. This is a special recipe from my travels. I hope you guys like it." He went around pouring the thick, dark brown liquid over the mashed potatoes. The color was rich, much darker than the usual pale brown gravy Elena made from store-bought packets. It smelled incredibly savory, with a hint of something herbal and sweet. Mrs. Darcy looked at the gravy suspiciously, but the smell was too good to resist. She allowed Kevin to pour a generous amount onto her plate. "Well, Kevin," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Let's see if this is edible or if we need to order pizza." The table laughed nervously. Kevin finished pouring and sat down in his seat, right next to Elena. He grabbed his fork, ready to eat, but he didn't put any gravy on his own food. "Aren't you going to have some?" Kevin. Elena asked, noticing his empty plate. Kevin waved his hand dismissively. "I tasted it plenty while I was cooking. I'm actually sick of the taste of it. You guys enjoy it? I'll just stick to the turkey and potatoes plain." Elena thought that was a little odd. Usually, if you made something good, you wanted to eat it. But she didn't push it. She was too hungry to argue. She scooped up a bite of turkey covered in the rich sauce and brought it to her mouth. The table went quiet for a moment as everyone took their first bite. The texture was velvety smooth, coating the tongue perfectly. The taste was complex, salty, certainly, but with an underlying richness that was hard to place. It wasn't just good, it was intense. "It's very unique," Mrs. Darcy said slowly, chewing thoughtfully. "It has quite a kick to it." "Right," Kevin said, grinning from ear to ear. It's the secret herbs. Uncle Jerry was already scraping his plate clean. I don't know what's in this, kid, but it's fantastic. Pass the boat back here. The mood seemed light. The tension Elena had been carrying in her shoulders began to loosen. The gravy was a hit. Kevin had actually saved the day. She felt a wave of relief wash over her. Maybe this wouldn't be a disaster after all. Maybe this would be the Thanksgiving where everything finally went right. She looked around the table. Everyone was eating happily. The conversation started to flow again, turning to work and school and the usual holiday gossip. Elena took another bite, savoring the flavor. She noticed, though, that her cheeks felt a little warm. She assumed it was just the heat of the kitchen and the rush of the day finally catching up with her. She laughed at a joke Uncle Jerry told, a little louder than she intended. Kevin watched them all eat, his eyes darting around the table. He didn't touch his food. He just sat there, tapping his fingers on the table, looking like he was waiting for a movie to reach its climax. Elena caught his eye and gave him a warm smile. He smiled back, but there was a strange glint in his eyes that she couldn't quite read. It wasn't malice, but it wasn't just pride, either. It was something else, something she couldn't identify in the haze of her exhaustion and relief. She leaned back in her chair, listening to her family talk, feeling the warm, heavy feeling of the dinner settling in her stomach. She took a sip of her wine and closed her eyes for just a second, thinking that for the first time in years, she had pulled off the perfect Thanksgiving. She had no idea that the perfect dinner was just the calm before the storm, and that her son's special gravy was about to turn the night into a memory nobody would ever forget. For the first 20 minutes of the meal, everything proceeded exactly as Elena had dreamed it would. The dining room was filled with the warm, golden glow of the chandelier overhead, casting a cozy light over the faces of her family members. The clinking of silverware against china was the only music Elena needed to hear. It meant people were eating, they were happy, and nobody was complaining yet. She watched from the head of the table, her chest swelling with a sense of deep relief. The turkey was moist, the rolls were fluffy, and the green bean casserole had that perfect crispy onion topping on top. But the real star of the show, undeniably, was the gravy. It sat in a large boat in the center of the table, dark and mysterious, calling out to everyone. Usually, gravy was just an afterthought in this family, a salty lubricant to help dry turkey go down. But this year, it was the main event. Uncle Jerry, who was typically a picky eater and stuck strictly to mashed potatoes and corn, had poured a generous river of the brown sauce over his entire plate. He took a massive bite, closed his eyes, and let out a long, appreciative groan. "Kevin," Uncle Jerry said, pointing his fork at the young man. "I have to hand it to you. I've been coming to this dinner for 30 years, and this is the best thing I've ever tasted on this table. No offense, Elena." Elena laughed, feeling genuinely happy rather than polite. "None taken, Jerry. I'm just glad he finally decided to help out. I might have to retire and let him take over the kitchen next year." The table erupted in laughter. Even Mrs. Darcy, who was known for finding fault in the weather, let out a rare chuckle. She took a delicate sip of her wine and then a small bite of her turkey, which she had smothered in Kevin's creation. She chewed slowly, her expression thoughtful. Elena held her breath, waiting for the verdict. "It is, quite robust," Mrs. Darcy admitted, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "It has a very distinct herbal profile. I can taste rosemary, perhaps, or maybe sometime it's very sophisticated. I didn't know you had such a refined palate, Kevin." Kevin shrugged, taking a sip of water. He still hadn't touched his own food, which Elena found slightly odd. Usually, he was the first one done eating. He sat back in his chair, looking incredibly relaxed, watching everyone enjoy his cooking with a satisfied smirk on his face. "It's a family secret, Mrs. Darcy," Kevin said vaguely. "I'm just glad you guys like it. I was worried it might be too intense for everyone." "Intense is good," Uncle Jerry boomed, reaching for the gravy boat to pour a second helping. "Life is too short for bland food. Give me some more of that intense sauce." As the meal progressed, the atmosphere in the room began to change. It wasn't a bad change, at least not at first. It started as a heavy, comfortable blanket of relaxation. The usual tension that always existed between Elena's divorced parents seemed to evaporate. Her father, who usually sat in stony silence, was actually smiling and nodding along to the conversation. Elena felt it too. She felt her shoulders, which had been stuck up near her ears for days, finally drop. She felt incredibly warm, not just from the heat of the kitchen, but a pleasant, buzzing warmth that spread from her stomach out to her fingertips. She took a bite of a roll dipped in the gravy and closed her eyes. The flavor was incredible. It was savory, salty, and had a strange, sweet aftertaste that just made her want to take another bite immediately. She found herself eating faster than she intended, suddenly feeling a voracious hunger she hadn't felt minutes ago. "You know," Elena's father said, breaking a lull in the conversation. "I was looking at the wallpaper in the hallway earlier. The pattern on that is really fascinating. It's like little waves." The table went quiet for a second. Everyone looked at him. Talking about wallpaper was not something a grumpy grandfather usually did. Elena laughed, thinking he was just trying to be funny. "Dad, it's just wallpaper. It's been there since we moved in." "No, no," he insisted, staring intently at the empty space where the hallway was visible. "It has a lot of depth. It's nice." Kevin grinned from his seat. "See, it helps you appreciate the little things, right?" "Right," Elena's dad agreed, nodding slowly. The conversation picked back up, but the topics started to drift into strange territories. Usually, Thanksgiving dinner was dominated by gossip about cousins or complaints about politics. Tonight, Uncle Jerry spent 10 minutes talking about how soft the napkins felt. "Seriously, feel this," he said, rubbing the cloth napkin against his cheek. "Is this a new thread count? It feels like a cloud." Mrs. Darcy, who was normally very composed, had kicked off her heels under the table and was sitting with her legs tucked up on the chair, a very casual position for her. Her eyes were looking a little bit glossy, and she was smiling at nothing in particular. "I feel wonderful," Mrs. Darcy announced suddenly. "Just wonderful. Elena, you really outdid yourself. This wine is exquisite." Elena looked down at her own glass. She had only had half a glass. She didn't feel drunk, but she definitely felt different. The room seemed to be getting louder, yet she felt perfectly at peace with it. Every time someone laughed, she found herself laughing along twice as hard, her sides starting to ache. She looked over at Kevin. He was leaning back in his chair, looking around the table with wide, excited eyes, watching them all like he was conducting a science experiment. "Aren't you going to eat, honey?" Elena asked him again. She felt like she was floating a little bit when she spoke. "There's plenty left." Kevin shook his head. "I'm good, Mom. I had a huge breakfast. I'm just enjoying the vibes." "The vibes," Elena repeated, testing the word. Yes. The vibes are very good tonight. She looked at her plate and realized, to her surprise, that she had eaten everything. Not just the food, but she had scraped the plate clean. She wasn't even stuffed. In fact, she felt like she could eat another entire turkey leg. She looked around the table and saw that everyone else was in a similar state. Uncle Jerry was currently picking up the gravy boat to see if he could drink the last few drops straight from the porcelain spout. "Jerry, use a spoon," Mrs. Darcy scolded, but she was giggling while she said it. "Act like a human being." "I am a human," Jerry said, looking confused. "I'm just a very thirsty human." The dining room was filled with a haze of contentment. It was the most peaceful Thanksgiving Elena had hosted in years. There was no fighting, no snide comments, and no stress. Everyone was just happy. Incredibly, strangely happy. Elena felt a wave of gratitude toward Kevin. He had been right. His special recipe had saved the night. He had brought the family together in a way she never could. She decided right then and there that she would let him cook the gravy every single year from now on. It was worth whatever mysterious ingredients he put in it just to see her family getting along this well. "We should take a picture," Elena suggested, pulling her phone out of her pocket. "Everyone look here. We need to remember this." They all huddled together. Uncle Jerry threw an arm around Kevin's shoulders, squeezing him tight. Mrs. Darcy leaned in, her smile a bit too wide, her eyes a bit too bright. Elena held the camera up. She felt a slight wobble in her hands, her fingers tingling, but she attributed it to all the cooking. She snapped the photo. In the moment the shutter clicked, everything looked perfect. "Okay, who wants coffee and pie?" Elena asked cheerfully, standing up. As she stood, the room seemed to tilt just a fraction to the left. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. A wave of dizziness washed over her, but it wasn't an unpleasant dizziness. It felt like she was stepping off a boat. "Whoa," she said, blinking a few times. "Head rush. I stood up too fast." "I got it," Kevin said, jumping up to help her. But he didn't look concerned. He looked excited. "Why don't you sit back down, Mom? I'll handle the dessert." "No, no," Elena insisted, blinking rapidly to clear her vision. "I'm the host. I need to serve." She took a step toward the kitchen, but her legs felt heavy, like she was walking through deep mud. She looked back at the table. Uncle Jerry was staring at a candle flame with total focus, mesmerized by the flickering light. Her father was running his hand along the tablecloth, feeling the texture over and over again. Mrs. Darcy, however, had stopped giggling. She was staring at her hands, which were resting in her lap. She turned her palms up and down, squinting at them. "Elena," Mrs. Darcy asked, her voice sounding small and far away. "Why do my hands feel like they are vibrating?" Elena opened her mouth to answer, to tell her it was just the warmth of the room, but she realized that her own hands were trembling. Not from cold, but from a strange, electric energy running under her skin. She looked at Kevin. He was standing by the door to the kitchen, blocking the way. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was biting his lip, looking from his grandmother to his uncle, his eyes darting around the room with frantic energy. "Kevin?" Elena asked. She felt like her tongue was too big for her mouth. "Is everyone okay?" Kevin took a deep breath. The relaxed atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sudden, heavy tension that Elena could feel in her bones. The meal was over. And something else was about to begin. "They're great, Mom," Kevin said, his voice cracking just a little. "Just great. This is going to be a night to remember." The room suddenly felt very hot, and the buzzing noise in Elena's ears got louder. The perfect dinner was slipping away, and she couldn't understand why. She just knew that the feeling of peace was rapidly turning into a feeling of panic. The buzzing in Elena's ears wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a physical sensation, like a swarm of bees had nested inside her brain. She watched Mrs. Darcy closely. The older woman had gone from staring at her hands to gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were turning white. "I don't feel right," Mrs. Darcy said, her voice trembling. It wasn't a loud complaint, but in the sudden quiet of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. Elena tried to stand up straight, to take charge, but her body felt heavy and loose, like a rag doll. "What do you mean, Mom? Is it your heart?" I think my heart is trying to jump out of my chest," Mrs. Darcy whispered, her eyes wide and darting around the room. "Why is the ceiling moving like that?" Across the table, Uncle Jerry let out a loud, sharp laugh that had absolutely no humor in it. "The ceiling. It's breathing, Elena. Look at it breathe." Elena snapped her head toward him. The room seemed to tilt sideways when she moved too fast. A wave of nausea rolled over her, but it was mixed with a strange sense of floating. She grabbed the back of her chair to anchor herself to the ground. This wasn't right. This was far beyond a heavy meal or a little bit too much wine. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from cozy and happy to something thick, suffocating, and completely out of control. She looked at her own father. He wasn't talking about wallpaper anymore. He was sitting with his head in his hands, swaying back and forth like a metronome. He looked terrified. "Dad," Elena called out. Her voice sounded slurred to her own ears, like she was speaking through a mouthful of cotton. "Dad, do you need some water?" He slowly lifted his head. His eyes, usually a sharp blue, were red-rimmed and glazed over. He looked at Elena with total confusion, as if he had never seen her before in his life. "The colors," he mumbled. "The noise. It's too loud. Make the colors stop." Panic, cold and sharp, finally cut through Elena's mental fog. Whatever was happening, it was happening to everyone. And the only common denominator was the food. Specifically, the gravy. She spun around to face Kevin. He was standing by the doorway to the kitchen, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked pale, his eyes wide with panic. He realized that the chill vibe he had promised had turned into a chaotic disaster. "Kevin," Elena said, her voice shaking. She tried to walk toward him, but her legs felt like jelly. She stumbled slightly, catching herself on the buffet table. "What was in that gravy? Tell me right now." Kevin swallowed hard, looking around the room at the chaos he had created. Mrs. Darcy was now hyperventilating, convinced the chandelier was going to fall on her. Uncle Jerry was trying to stand up but kept forgetting how to use his knees, collapsing back into his chair in a fit of giggles and then sudden, sharp frowns. "It was just butter," Kevin stammered, his voice cracking. "It was special butter. My friend gave it to me before I left. He said it was strong, but I didn't think it was that strong. I just wanted everyone to have a good time." "You're always so stressed, Mom." "Special butter," Elena repeated. The words echoed in her head. She wasn't a stranger to the world, she knew what that meant in this context, but she never imagined her son would bring it to a family dinner, let alone feed it to his grandmother. "You fed us," special butter with heart medication and blood thinners in the mix. Elena felt like she couldn't breathe. The room was spinning faster now. The laughter from Uncle Jerry had turned into a weird, low humming sound. The lights from the chandelier were starting to leave trails across her vision. She needed to act. She needed water, she needed to call someone, but her brain felt like it was wrapped in thick wool. "Okay, nobody panic," Elena announced, trying to sound authoritative, but she knew she sounded ridiculous. Her grandmother was currently panicking because she thought she could see music. "Everyone just, stay seated. I'm going to get water." She managed to push herself off the buffet table and lurch toward the kitchen. As she passed Kevin, she grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "You need to help me," she hissed. "Whatever you put in there, you need to fix it." "I can't fix it, Mom," Kevin shouted, looking truly terrified now. "That's not how it works. It has to wear off." "Wear off?" Elena felt a scream building up in her throat. "Your grandmother is 85 years old. She can't just wait it out if her heart is racing." She pushed past him and stumbled into the kitchen. The kitchen was a disaster zone of pots and pans, but it looked peaceful compared to the dining room. Elena grabbed a large pitcher of water and a stack of glasses. Her hands were shaking so badly that she nearly dropped the pitcher. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for just a second to try and stop the room from tilting. In that second of silence, she could hear the sounds from the dining room getting louder. It wasn't just conversation anymore. It was shouting. Mrs. Darcy was crying now, a confused, fearful wail that broke Elena's heart. Uncle Jerry was shouting about the government or something equally random. Elena opened her eyes and looked at the trash can. She saw a familiar wrapper sticking out. It was a label with a green leaf on it. She grabbed it and read the dosage recommendation. It wasn't a teaspoon per serving. It was a fraction of a teaspoon per serving. Kevin hadn't just added a little bit. He had dumped the entire stick into the roux. She dropped the wrapper as if it burned her. This wasn't just a bad Thanksgiving. This was a medical emergency. She filled the glasses with water, splashing half of it onto the floor in her haste. She grabbed the tray and turned back to the dining room, bracing herself for the scene she was about to walk into. As she stepped back into the doorway, she saw Mrs. Darcy trying to stand up. The older woman was swaying dangerously, her face pale and sweaty. "Sit down, please," Elena begged, rushing forward as fast as her wobbly legs would carry her. "I have to go," Mrs. Darcy wept, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know where I am. I want to go home." Elena reached her just as Mrs. Darcy's knees buckled. She caught her grandmother, but the weight was too much for her impaired balance. They both tumbled to the floor in a heap of skirts and limbs. The crash echoed through the house. Uncle Jerry jumped up, knocking his chair over. "It's an earthquake," he yelled. "No, it's not an earthquake," Kevin yelled back, running over to help. "Grandma fell. Help me." The dinner was officially over. The nightmare had fully taken over. Elena looked up from the floor, seeing the terrified faces of her family, the overturned chairs, and the ruined feast. She looked at Kevin, who was staring at his hands with absolute horror, realizing that his attempt to be the cool chef had just ruined the family reputation forever, and the worst part was, the night was far from over. The special gravy had just started to work its magic. The floor felt incredibly cold against Elena's skin, a sharp contrast to the fiery heat pulsing through her body. She lay there for a moment, tangled up in Mrs. Darcy's legs, staring at the underside of the dining table. The wood grain seemed to be swirling like a river, moving and twisting in ways that wood definitely shouldn't move. She blinked hard, trying to snap out of it, but the room continued to tilt dangerously to the left. "Get up. Please, just get up." Kevin's voice was high-pitched and filled with panic. He was kneeling beside them, his hands flailing uselessly as he tried to figure out which limb belonged to which woman. "I can't," Mrs. Darcy was sobbing, her voice cracking in a way Elena had never heard before. The older woman, who always carried herself with iron dignity, was now curled in a fetal position, clutching her chest. "My heart is beating so fast. It feels like a bird trapped in my ribs. I'm dying, Elena. I know I'm dying." Elena forced herself to move. She pushed against the floor, her muscles feeling like they were made of lead. The surge of adrenaline was fighting against the effects of the special gravy, creating a war inside her body that made her sweat. She grabbed Mrs. Darcy's hand. "You are not dying," Elena said, trying to sound like the responsible adult she was supposed to be, even though her own voice was shaking and the walls seemed to be breathing in time with the grandmother's sobs. We just ate something that didn't agree with us. Kevin, help me get her to the couch." Between the two of them, they managed to hoist Mrs. Darcy to her feet. She swayed violently, her eyes wide and unfocused, staring straight through Elena as if she were a ghost. They half walked, half carried her into the living room and lowered her onto the sofa. As soon as Mrs. Darcy sat down, she slumped over, burying her face in a decorative pillow, muttering about patterns and shapes that didn't exist. Elena spun around to assess the rest of the damage. The dining room looked like a tornado had hit it. Chairs were overturned, the gravy boat had shattered on the floor, spilling the dark, disastrous liquid across the rug, and the once beautiful turkey sat lonely and abandoned on the table. Uncle Jerry was no longer at the table. Elena found him standing in the corner of the living room, his nose pressed against the wallpaper. He was whispering aggressively to himself. "Jerry," Elena called out, stepping carefully over the shattered ceramic. He jumped and spun around, pointing a shaking finger at nothing. "The government is listening to us through the walls, Elena. I can hear them. They know about the gravy. They want the recipe. There is no government, Jerry. Please, just sit down." Elena felt a wave of hopelessness wash over her. She couldn't reason with him, her brain was foggy, slow to process the absurdity of the situation. She looked at her own father. He was sitting in his recliner, gripping the armrests with white knuckles, looking around the room with sheer terror. "Dad," she approached him softly. He looked at her, his lower lip trembling. "Elena, is that you? Why are your eyes so big? Everything is so bright." "It hurts my eyes." "I know, Dad. I know." She rubbed his shoulder, feeling the thin fabric of his shirt. She felt a tear slide down her own cheek, hot and fast. The humiliation was burning her throat almost as much as the paranoia. This was it. Her reputation as a good mother, a good host, a sensible person, it was all gone. Destroyed by a stick of butter and a son who didn't know when to stop. She turned to look at Kevin. He was standing in the middle of the room, hands on his head, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "What were you thinking?" Elena whispered, the words coming out as a strangled hiss. "Look at them. Look at Grandma. She could have a heart attack." "I didn't know." Kevin cried out, his face pale as a sheet. "I swear, I thought it would just make everyone giggle a bit and sleep well. I didn't know it would be this strong. I ate some yesterday and I was fine. Did you eat the whole stick yesterday? Elena yelled, losing her temper. No. I only had a little bit. I put the whole stick in the gravy because I wanted to make sure the flavor was strong enough. Kevin looked horrified as the realization hit him. I thought the cooking process would, lower the potency. Elena stared at him in disbelief. You cooked with it, that makes it stronger, Kevin. Everyone knows that. Kevin froze, his face draining of whatever color was left. I didn't know. Oh my God. I really messed up. Mrs. Darcy let out a loud groan from the couch, pulling Elena's attention away from her son. The older woman was trying to stand up again, waving her hands as if she were swatting away invisible flies. I need to go to the hospital, Mrs. Darcy announced loudly, though her words were slurring together. I am having a stroke. I can feel my face melting. Elena looked at her father, who was now catatonic, staring at the TV which wasn't even turned on. She looked at Uncle Jerry, who was trying to climb onto the windowsill to escape the frequencies. She couldn't handle this. She was barely keeping herself upright. The room was spinning so fast she felt like she might throw up. She needed help. Professional help. She reached into her pocket and fumbled for her phone. Her fingers felt like sausages, thick and clumsy. It took her 3 tries to unlock the screen. The brightness of the phone blinded her for a second, making her recoil. Who are you calling? Kevin asked, terrified. I'm calling 911, Elena said, her voice trembling. I can't take care of everyone. Dad is out of it, Grandma thinks she's dying, and Jerry is losing his mind. I can't do this, Kevin. I just can't. No, Mom, please. Kevin grabbed her arm. They will arrest me. It's illegal. You can't call the cops. Elena yanked her arm away. They aren't going to arrest you, Kevin, they are going to save your grandmother from a heart attack. If she dies because of your special gravy, that's on you. Now move. She dialed the numbers. The ringtone sounded impossibly loud in the chaotic room. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, robotic, and distant. Elena took a deep breath, trying to stop her voice from shaking. Hi, she started, her voice cracking. I need an ambulance. My family, we are having a medical reaction to food. My grandmother is having chest pains and hallucinations, and my uncle is not acting right. And my father is unresponsive. Is everyone breathing? The dispatcher asked. Yes, we are breathing. But we are all affected. It was an accident. We ingested marijuana. A large amount of it. In the gravy. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Okay, ma'am. Help is on the way. I need you to stay on the line with me. How old is the grandmother? She is 85, Elena said, tears flowing freely now. Please hurry. Elena sank down onto the floor, leaning her back against the wall. She watched the chaos swirl around her. Kevin was pacing back and forth, pulling at his hair. Mrs. Darcy was singing a nursery rhyme to the pillow. Uncle Jerry had finally sat down on the floor and was examining the carpet fibers with intense fascination. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, before she heard the sirens. The wailing sound grew louder and louder, piercing through the fog in her brain. Red and blue lights began to flash through the living room windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The front door flew open, and two paramedics rushed in, carrying heavy bags. They took one look at the scene: the overturned furniture, the sobbing grandmother, the wild-eyed uncle, and their eyes went wide. "We're in here," Elena called out weakly, raising a hand. The paramedics moved with efficiency. One went straight to Mrs. Darcy, checking her vitals. The other approached Elena's father. "What happened here?" the taller paramedic asked, looking around suspiciously. "We had Thanksgiving dinner," Elena said, feeling a wave of dizziness. "My son made the gravy. He put a lot of cannabis butter in it. We didn't know." The paramedic looked over at Kevin, who was standing in the corner, looking like he wanted to vanish. "A lot. The whole stick," Elena whispered. The paramedic's eyebrows shot up. "Wow. Okay. That explains the hallucinations." He turned back to Mrs. Darcy. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Mrs. Darcy looked up, her eyes wide. "Are you the king? I didn't vote for you." The paramedic sighed and motioned to his partner. "We're going to need to transport all of them. The elderly ones for sure. The vitals are all over the place." As they began to load the family onto stretchers, Elena realized the nightmare wasn't ending. It was just changing scenes. The entire neighborhood was outside. She could see faces pressed against the windows, neighbors watching the spectacle. The ambulance lights were spinning, painting the street in colors of emergency. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling. A paramedic walked over to her. "Ma'am, are you okay? You look very pale." "I'm fine," Elena lied. "I'm just mortified." "You should probably get checked out too," the paramedic said gently. "You look pretty out of it." Elena looked at Kevin. He was standing by the door, watching them take his grandmother away. He looked small, broken, and terrified. She wanted to hug him, but she was just too angry. Instead, she just nodded at the paramedic. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." She walked out the front door, past the remnants of the perfect dinner she had spent 3 days planning. She stepped into the cool night air, leaving the door open behind her. The house was silent now, save for the hum of the refrigerator. The special gravy had done its job. It had taken a boring family dinner and turned it into a disaster that everyone in town would be talking about for the next 20 years. The lights in the hospital emergency room were painfully bright, especially for eyes that were still trying to recover from the sensory overload of the special gravy. Elena sat on a hard, plastic chair, hugging her knees to her chest. The adrenaline had completely worn off, leaving her with a crushing headache and a deep sense of exhaustion that seeped all the way into her bones. Around her, the hospital buzzed with the sounds of nurses walking, phones ringing, and quiet conversations, but to Elena, it all felt muffled, like she was underwater. They had been there for 4 hours. The scene in the ER waiting area was something out of a surreal comedy movie that she desperately wanted to walk out of. Mrs. Darcy was sitting in a wheelchair, looking small and frail, wrapped in a heated hospital blanket. She was awake now, alert, and absolutely furious. Her color had returned, but so had her sharp tongue. Every few minutes, she would look over at Kevin, who was sitting in the corner with his head in his hands, and let out a loud huff of disapproval. Uncle Jerry was sprawled out on 2 chairs, snoring loudly. He had been given something to help him sleep and lower his heart rate, and he was currently completely dead to the world. Elena's father was sitting next to her, staring blankly at a vending machine. He was sober, but he was exhausted. He looked like a man who had just run a marathon and lost. A doctor finally walked through the double doors, holding a clipboard. He looked tired, and when he saw the group gathered in the waiting area, he paused for a moment, composing his expression. "Family of Mrs. Darcy?" he asked, though he clearly knew who they were. Elena stood up quickly, her legs stiff. "That's us. Is she going to be okay?" "She is going to be fine," the doctor said, his voice calm. "Her heart rate has stabilized. We ran some blood work, and the levels of the substance in her system were quite high. Given her age and blood pressure, it was a dangerous situation. She was very lucky that her heart is strong, or we could have been looking at a much more serious cardiac event. We are going to keep her for observation for a few more hours, but she should be able to go home tonight." Elena let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for days. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I need to ask," the doctor said, lowering his voice slightly and glancing at Kevin. "How exactly did this happen? It's not common for an entire family to ingest that much accidentally." Elena felt her face burn with humiliation. She looked at Kevin, who lifted his head slowly, his face red with shame. "It was my fault," Kevin mumbled, not making eye contact with the doctor. "I cooked with butter I made. I didn't realize how strong it was. I thought it would just make the dinner fun. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." The doctor sighed, closing his clipboard. "Well, son, I can tell you that tonight was definitely not fun for the nurses or for your grandmother. You need to be extremely careful with substances like that. Dosage matters. And never, ever give it to someone without their knowledge. That is a quick way to end up in legal trouble that is much worse than an ER bill." Kevin nodded vigorously, tears welling up in his eyes. "I know. I'm so sorry. I really messed up." The doctor gave them a few discharge papers and instructions for Mrs. Darcy and Elena's father, who was also feeling the lingering effects but was physically stable. As the doctor walked away, the heavy reality of the night settled back down on Elena's shoulders. The car ride home was silent. There was no music, no talking. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle from Kevin in the back seat. Mrs. Darcy had refused to speak to Kevin since she woke up in the ambulance. She sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her anger was a physical weight in the car, making the air feel thick and hard to breathe. When they finally pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. It looked like a skeleton of the happy home that had existed just 6 hours ago. The decorative lights Elena had strung up were still blinking, but they looked mocking now. Elena unlocked the front door and flipped on the light. The smell hit her instantly. It was the stale, heavy scent of roasting turkey mixed with the distinct, earthy odor of the spilled gravy. The dining room looked like a crime scene. The table was still covered in half-eaten plates, overturned glasses, and the shattered remains of the gravy boat. The dark brown sauce had dried into the rug, leaving a stain that Elena knew would probably never come out. She looked at the mess and felt tears sting her eyes. This was her masterpiece. This was her attempt at a perfect family memory. Now, it was just a disaster zone. "Don't just stand there," Mrs. Darcy said, her voice sharp and cold, breaking the silence. She walked slowly into the living room and sank onto the sofa, wiping her forehead. "I am going home. I am taking a taxi. I cannot be in this house right now." "Mom, please," Elena started, stepping forward. "Let me make you some tea. You should rest." Mrs. Darcy held up a hand to stop her. "No, Elena. I appreciate the help, but I need to go. I need to sleep in my own bed. And frankly, I need to be away from him. She pointed a trembling finger at Kevin, who was standing in the doorway with his head down. I'll call you a cab, Elena said quietly, defeated. She helped her mother-in-law settle in and watched the tail lights of the taxi disappear down the street. Then, she turned to Kevin. Her son was standing in the middle of the living room, looking at the mess, his shoulders slumped. Kevin, she said. Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was just tired. You need to start cleaning this up. Now. I will, Mom, he said, his voice cracking. I'll clean everything. I'll pay for the rug. I'll pay for the hospital bills. I promise. You're damn right you will, Elena said, sitting down heavily on a chair. That ambulance ride alone costs more than your car. And you are going to work to pay back every cent of it? I will, he said. He grabbed a trash bag and started walking toward the table, stepping carefully over the broken ceramic. The next few days were a blur of awkward phone calls and scrubbing floors. The story spread through the family like wildfire. Of course, Mrs. Darcy told everyone. She didn't mean to be cruel, but she was traumatized, and sharing the story was her way of processing it. Soon, cousins Elena hadn't spoken to in years were calling to ask if it was true. Was it true that Kevin drugged the whole family? Did Uncle Jerry really think he could fly? Did the grandmother call 911? Elena had to answer the phone over and over again, apologizing and explaining that yes, it was true, and no, Kevin wasn't a criminal, he was just an idiot who made a terrible mistake. The strict aunt, who had always prided herself on her traditional values, sent a scathing email to the family group chat. She said she would never attend a dinner at Elena's house again. She couldn't trust the food. She didn't want her children exposed to such recklessness. It hurt Elena to read it, but she couldn't blame her. She had lost control of her own home. Kevin didn't leave his room for almost a week, except to eat sandwiches and scrub the floors. He had taken a part-time job at a local warehouse to start earning money for the medical bills. He didn't complain. He didn't make excuses. He just worked and apologized. The incident had humbled him in a way that nothing else ever could. Thanksgiving was ruined. The photos from that day were deleted. The gravy boat was thrown in the trash. The stain on the rug remained as a permanent reminder of the night the special gravy took over. A month later, life had mostly returned to normal, but the dynamic had shifted. The family dinners were smaller now. Just Elena, Kevin, and her dad. They ate simple food. Roast chicken, steamed vegetables. Nothing fancy. Nothing with sauces. One evening, they were sitting at the same dining table, now cleared of the debris. Kevin was eating quietly, pushing peas around his plate. He looked up and saw Elena watching him. I'm really sorry, Mom, he said, for the 100th time. I just wanted to make it fun. I wanted you to be proud of me for cooking something. Elena sighed softly. She looked at her son. He looked older now. His eyes didn't have that naive sparkle they used to. He looked like someone who had learned a hard lesson. I was proud of you for wanting to help, Kevin, she said gently. But you can't take shortcuts to happiness. You can't force people to relax. You just have to let things be. She took a sip of water and looked at the empty spot on the table where the gravy boat used to sit. We survived, I guess. That's what matters. And we will never, ever have gravy at this table again. Kevin cracked a small, sad smile. Deal. They finished their meal in silence, but it wasn't a heavy silence anymore. It was just quiet. The nightmare was over, but the memory of the special gravy would be a story told at family gatherings for the rest of time, always prefaced with a warning: read the label, and never, ever trust Kevin with the roux.